She found a deed folded inside her father's Bible. It led to a farm no one knew existed. My name is Marin Holloway, and my story begins on the day the state of Oregon was finally finished with me, or maybe the day I was finally finished with the state of Oregon. I'm still not sure which way that door swung. It was my 18th birthday, the 15th of July, a Tuesday of all days. There was no cake, no candles, no one singing off key in a circle around me. There was only paperwork, stacks of it lined up across Mrs. Eldridge's beige metal desk, like soldiers waiting to be inspected, release forms, liability waivers, final checklists, a medical history I was now responsible for, a list of resources I was now expected to memorize. I sat in that small office on the second floor of Glenwood House for Transitional Youth, with the radiator clanking like a tired old man in the corner. And I signed my name, over and over. Marin Holloway, Marin Holloway, Marin Holloway. By the 20th signature, the letters had stopped meaning anything. They were just shapes my hand had learned to make when authority asked it to. Mrs. Eldridge had been with the system for 31 years. She had told me that once on a long ride back from a court hearing when I was 12. She had been my caseworker since the morning the state first took me in. 8 years old in a borrowed sweater, sitting in a different beige office on a different beige chair. She had been the one constant in 10 years of moving rooms. She had a face like an old paperback, soft at the edges, deeply creased, but still holding together somehow. She wore reading glasses on a beaded chain around her neck, and she always smelled faintly of peppermints and stale coffee. She slid the last paper across the desk. I signed it. I did not even read it. She did not ask me to. Then she leaned back in her chair, folded her hands on her stomach, and looked at me for a long moment, like she was trying to see all the way through to the other side of me, to see what kind of woman the system had made. "Well," she said, finally. "That's it then. That's it. 10 years compressed into 2 words. 10 years of bunk beds and cafeteria food. 10 years of new schools and new last names on attendance lists. 10 years of caseworkers I outlasted and house parents I outgrew. 10 years of being a file number, a placement, a problem someone else got paid to manage. That's it." She reached down, opened a drawer in the bottom of her desk, and pulled out a cardboard box. It was about the size of a microwave oven. Plain, gray. The corners were soft from age. Someone had written on the side in faded black marker in handwriting I did not recognize. Holloway Silas. I stared at the name, my father's name. The name I had not seen written down in any place that mattered for 10 years. "What is that?" I asked. My voice sounded thin in my own ears. Mrs. Eldridge slid the box across the desk toward me. It made a soft scraping sound on the laminate. "These are your father's personal effects," she said. "They've been in storage at the county annex since you came into the system. We're required by statute to release them to you upon your majority." My majority. That was the word she used. Like I was about to inherit a kingdom. Like the box was full of crowns and gold coins and royal decrees, instead of whatever the landlord of a dead logger had thought to throw into a box 20 years ago. I just looked at it. I did not reach for it. I think I was afraid of it. "I never knew this existed," I said. "Most kids don't," she answered. "We don't tell them. There's no point. Half the time the box is empty. Half the time it's worse than empty." I did not know what worse than empty meant. I was not sure I wanted to find out. She slid one more form across the desk, a receipt, acknowledging I had received the property of one Silas Holloway, deceased. I signed my name, Marin Holloway, and just like that, I was the official owner of a box of ghosts. I want you to understand something before this story goes any further, before you decide whether to stay with me on this road. I had spent 10 years being told who my father was. I had been told he was a wanderer, a man who couldn't sit still long enough to put down roots, a logger who worked seasonal jobs up and down the coast, lived in motel rooms and railroad apartments, and died finally when a tree he was felling came down in the wrong direction. I had been told he had no people, no family, no savings, no plan. I had been told very gently by a woman with kind eyes and a soft voice that my father had loved me, but that love was not the same thing as a future. That love did not pay for a college fund or a roof or a name to inherit. That my father in the end had left me with nothing but a single blurry photograph and a memory. For 10 years I had carried that story like a stone in my chest. The story of a man who had loved me, but not enough. That story was about to end. I just did not know it yet. I carried the box back to my room at Glenwood. The room was 8 feet by 10 feet, white walls, a window that looked out onto the parking lot, a twin bed with sheets that had been washed so many times they felt like paper, a small dresser with a mirror that was cracked across one corner. This had been my room for the last 14 months. Tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, it would be someone else's. They were already on the waiting list. I sat on the floor with my back against the bed, and I looked at the box. The other girls in the house had tried to throw me a little party that afternoon. Sage, who was 13 and angry at the world. Becca, who was 16 and pregnant. A few others. They had bought a cupcake from the corner store, the kind with white frosting, and a single candle stuck crookedly in the middle. And they had sung Happy Birthday in voices that were too loud and too brave. I had smiled. I had thanked them. And then I had come up here and closed the door. And I had not been able to stop thinking about that box. I did not open it for a long time. I made myself wait. I do not know why. Maybe I wanted to hold the question for a little longer before I let the answer take it from me. Maybe for the first time in my life I had something coming that was just for me, just for Marin. And I wanted to be slow about it. The house quieted down around me. The hum of the old refrigerator downstairs. The settling of the floorboards in the warm summer night. The whisper of voices behind closed doors. By midnight, Glenwood was as still as it ever got. I knelt on the floor and I pulled at the packing tape. It was old, brittle. It cracked under my fingernails like the dry skin of a thing long dead. The cardboard flaps sighed open and a puff of stale, dusty air came up to meet me. It smelled like attics, like forgotten things, and underneath it something else, something faint, something I almost recognized but could not name. Cedar. Just a hint of cedar, the way you might smell it on a man's coat when he comes in from a cool morning. Inside the box, things were exactly the way Mrs. Eldridge had said they would be. There were books, a lot of them, worn paperbacks with cracked spines and yellowed pages. Whitman, a volume of Robert Frost, a history of the Pacific Northwest Railroad, a field guide to North American trees. They were the books of a man who read alone in cabins and motel rooms by lamplight. There were pay stubs from a dozen different logging companies and construction outfits. Crescent City, Coos Bay, Astoria. The names traced a man moving up and down the coast like a fish in a current. There was a watch, cheap with a cracked crystal. The hands were stopped at 2:17. I held it in my palm for a long moment, and I tried to imagine what had been happening at 2:17 on the day this watch had stopped. I could not. The man who had worn it was a stranger to me. There was a Zippo lighter, brass scratched and dented. I flicked it open. I tried to spark it. Nothing. The flint had given up a long time ago. It was the debris of a life, the exact debris I had been promised. A rolling stone. A man who had owned little and left less. I felt something curl up tight inside me. A small, hard knot of disappointment. So this was it. This was the inheritance. A pile of paper and dead metal. The story I had been told my whole life was confirmed right here on the floor of my last room in the last group home. And then my fingers brushed the bottom of the box. There was something heavier underneath the books, something solid. I pulled it out. It was a Bible, plain black leather, the kind you find in motel drawers. There was no name embossed on the front, nothing on the spine. The corners were worn smooth the way leather goes when a man's hands have been on it for years. It was a working Bible, not a decoration. Something cold settled in my chest. I opened the cover, and there on the flyleaf in neat, blocky handwriting that I had never seen before were 2 lines. The first was his name, Silas Holloway. The second was a date. It was the day I was born. I held my breath. I traced the letters of his name with the tip of my finger. This was the first time in my entire memory that I had seen my father's handwriting. 18 years old, and I was meeting my father's hand for the first time. I started to turn the pages. They were thin and dry like the pages of all old Bibles, and they whispered against my fingers as I went. I did not know what I was looking for. I did not know I was looking for anything. I was just turning pages the way you might walk slowly through the rooms of a house you have inherited, just to feel the shape of it. And then I felt it. Halfway through the book, in the long pages of Proverbs, there was a slight thickness. A small bulge between 2 leaves. My fingers found it before my eyes did. I stopped turning. I opened the Bible flat in my lap, and there, tucked deep into the spine of the page, was a piece of paper. It was folded into a tight little square. The paper was old, stiff, yellow at the creases. My hands started to shake. I did not know why. There was no reason for them to shake. But they did. I worked the paper free. I unfolded it slowly the way a man might unfold a map he has not looked at in a long time and is afraid to find changed. It was not a letter. It was not a photograph. At the top of the page, in heavy, ornate script, were 3 words: Quit claim deed. Below that, a long block of legal language about sections and townships and ranges. Words I did not understand. Numbers I did not recognize. A surveyor's description of a piece of land somewhere in the world. And then, near the bottom, 2 things that stopped my breath. The first was a name. Grantee Silas Holloway. The second was an address. Not a street number. A rural route in a town I had never heard of. Stillwater, Oregon. I sat there on the floor of that small white room for a long time. The Bible open in my lap. The deed in my hand. The cracked watch on the carpet beside me still stopped at 2:17. I picked up my phone with my other hand. The screen lit up the room. I typed Stillwater, Oregon into the search bar. The first result called it an unincorporated community, about 3 hours east of Portland in the Cascade foothills. Population in steady decline since the mill closed. The article called it in plain words a ghost town. I read the description on the deed again. 50 acres, a farmhouse, a barn, 50 acres. My father, the rolling stone. My father, the man with no plan and no people. My father, the wanderer who had died with nothing. My father had owned 50 acres of land. For 10 years, no one had told me. Not the social workers, not the lawyers, not the state of Oregon. For 10 years, I had been sleeping on borrowed beds and eating off plastic trays and learning to disappear in foster homes, while a place that was his somewhere out there in the dark mountains had sat empty and waiting. I felt something move in me then. It was anger, but it was something older than anger and deeper. It was the anger you feel when you find out you have been lied to for so long, that the lie has shaped the inside of you. The anger that comes when you realize the story of who you are has been written by people who did not know you. And underneath the anger, a question. Why hide it? Why bury the deed in a Bible? Why let your daughter grow up not knowing? I looked at the clock on my phone. 1:45 in the morning. I had a backpack with everything I owned in it. I had $200 in a check from the state, the going rate for a finished foster child. I had a list of homeless shelters in the Portland area, neatly typed by Mrs. Eldridge. And I had a deed to 50 acres of land in a town I had never heard of, hidden in a Bible by a man I had not been allowed to know. I looked up the bus schedule. The earliest bus that headed up into the Cascades left the Portland station at 7 in the morning. It was not a plan. It was not even a decision, really. It was something simpler than that. It was a thread. For the first time in a very long time, I felt the need to pull on it, no matter what came loose. The bus station before dawn is a kind of in-between place. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The air smelled like diesel and disinfectant, and the kind of coffee that has been sitting in the pot too long. I sat on a hard plastic bench with my backpack at my feet and the box of my father's things on the seat beside me. I had almost left the box behind. I had stood in the doorway of my room at Glenwood at 4 in the morning, and I had looked at it, and I had thought about how much it weighed and how far I might have to carry it. And I had almost walked away. But I could not. The Bible was inside it. The deed had been folded inside the Bible. And it felt to me in some way I could not have explained that the Bible needed to come home. So I had carried it. I bought my ticket from a man behind a glass window. He had to look up Stillwater on a map. He frowned at it. "Not much out there, miss," he said. "You sure about this?" I was not sure of anything, but I nodded. "I'm sure." The bus rolled out of Portland just after 7. The city peeled away in layers. First the warehouses and the truck yards. Then the suburbs with their lit windows and their school buses lining up on the corners. Then the long, flat farmland. The fields of grass turned green gold in the early summer light. The dairy barns, the silver glint of irrigation pipes in the morning haze. I sat by the window and I watched the world I had always lived in disappear. By the time the road began to climb, the sky had turned the color of old pewter. A summer mountain rain had set, and the kind of rain that surprises a flatlander in July up in the high country. It began to streak the windows. The houses got further apart. The trees got taller and darker and closer to the road until it felt like we were driving through a tunnel of green that swallowed the sound of the engine. I had lived my whole life inside the city. Concrete and traffic, bus exhaust and bodega lights, the shrill bell of school hallways. This quiet on the other side of the glass was as foreign to me as the floor of the ocean. With every mile we climbed, the knot in my stomach pulled itself a little tighter. What was I doing? Chasing a piece of paper into the mountains, going to a place that might not even exist anymore. The farm could be gone, sold off for back taxes 30 years ago. The house could be a heap of rotten timber slowly sinking into the wet earth of the Cascades. I might walk all the way out there just to find another way to be disappointed by my father. I put my hand in my pocket. My fingers closed around the deed. It was the only thing I had ever owned. The bus stopped in a small town called Sandy, clinging to the highway like a man holding on to a railing in a strong wind. The driver said we had 30 minutes. I got off to stretch my legs. There was a diner across the street. Red booths, fogged windows, the smell of bacon. I went in and ordered a black coffee I could not really afford, and I sat at the counter with my hands wrapped around the mug. A man 2 stools over watched me. He was maybe 60. Trucker hat. A face that had spent a lot of years outdoors. He was nursing his own coffee like it was a cup he was in no hurry to finish. "Headed up the mountain," he said. I nodded. I did not feel like talking. He let it sit for a minute. Then he said, "Where to?" I hesitated. "A place called Stillwater." His eyebrows went up. He set his cup down slowly. "Stillwater," he said. He said it the way a man says a name he has not heard in a long time. "Lord, my granddad worked the mill out there before it shut down. 40 years ago, that was. Nothing out there now but trees and ghosts." He looked at me a little longer. "You got family there?" I thought about it. The deed was in my pocket. The Bible was in the box on the bus. My father's handwriting was in the Bible. Did I have family there? "Something like that," I said. He nodded slowly. He did not push. That I would learn was a thing about the men who lived up in those hills. They knew when not to push. "Well," he said, "bus won't take you all the way. You'll have to hitch from the junction at 26. "Thank you," I said. "Good luck to you, miss." He went back to his coffee. I went back to the bus. The land got wilder. The road narrowed. The rain came down harder, drumming on the roof of the bus in a steady rhythm that started to sound like a heartbeat. My phone lost its signal somewhere on a long climbing curve, and I watched the bars disappear one by one until there was only a small empty triangle in the corner of the screen. I had never been this far from a cell tower in my entire life. After what felt like years, the driver called out the junction. The bus hissed to a stop on the shoulder. I was the only one who got off. I stood under the overhang of a wooden lean-to as the bus pulled away. The red taillights dwindled and were swallowed by the mist. And then I was alone on the side of the highway in a way I had never been alone before. A single weathered sign stood at the edge of the road. White paint flaking off black wood. It pointed down a smaller, narrower road that wound away from the highway and into the trees. Stillwater. 12 miles, 12 miles. The rain was cool, the kind of cool that surprises you in July up in the high country. It was finding its way past the collar of my jacket. My sneakers were already starting to soak through. I pulled my hood up, hitched my backpack tighter, picked up the box, and I started walking. There was nothing else to do. The silence was the thing I remember most. I had thought silence was just the absence of sound. I learned that day that real silence has a shape, a weight, a pressure against your ears. Out there on that road, the only sounds were the drip of water from the trees, the soft hiss of rain on pavement, and the squelch of my own footsteps. Behind it all, the long hush of the wind in the high firs. I walked for a long time. I do not know how long. A few cars passed. They came up behind me with their headlights cutting through the gray, and they did not slow down, and they were gone again. I must have looked like a runaway. Wet hair, soaked jeans, a cardboard box held against her chest. I suppose I was a runaway. I just did not have anywhere to run from anymore. The damp settled into me slowly. My fingers stopped feeling like fingers. My knees ached. I started to think in a low, stubborn way about whether I was going to make it 12 miles in this weather. About whether anyone would find me if I did not. About whether anyone would even know to come looking. And then behind me an engine slowed. A pickup truck eased up alongside me. It was an old Ford, a faded blue with mud on the wheel wells and a dented tailgate. The passenger window rolled down with an electric whine that sounded older than the truck itself. A woman leaned across the seat to look at me. She was maybe 70, white hair pulled back in a loose knot, a face like a riverbed full of fine lines that all seemed to lead somewhere. Her eyes were a startling clear blue. "You're going to catch your death out here, child," she said. Her voice was raspy but kind. The kind of voice that has been used to talk to animals as much as to people. "Where are you headed?" "Stillwater," I said. My teeth were chattering. "I'm looking for a property. The old Holloway place." The blue eyes changed. I cannot describe to you exactly how they changed. It was not surprise. It was something deeper than surprise. It was recognition. It was the way a person looks when a name they had not expected to hear again rises up out of a long quiet. "Silas Holloway's place," she said softly. It was not a question. "Yes," I said. She studied me for a long moment through the open window. The rain came down between us. Her windshield wipers clacked back and forth. "Lord have mercy," she said almost to herself. "No one has been out to that property in 15-20 years. She kept looking at me, and then her face did something I would think about for a long time afterward. Her mouth softened. Her eyes filled with a kind of slow, sad recognition, like she had been waiting a long time without knowing she was waiting for somebody to walk down this road. "Well," she said, "get in. I'm headed that way. Name's Wren." I did not hesitate. I put the box in the bed of the truck next to a couple of bags of chicken feed. I climbed into the passenger seat and pulled the door shut behind me. The cab was warm. It smelled of hay and coffee and a wet dog that was not there. The heater was throwing out a strong, dry heat against my legs. "Thank you," I said. My voice cracked. "I'm Marin." She did not turn the truck back onto the road right away. She just sat there with her hands on the wheel looking out at the rain through the windshield. And then she said very quietly the words that changed the shape of everything that came after. "I know who you are, child." I went still. She glanced over at me. Her eyes were wet. "You've got your father's eyes." I could not speak. I sat there in that warm cab, on the side of a wet road in the middle of nowhere. And I stared at this stranger who had known my father, who had known him well enough to recognize his eyes and his daughter's face 20 years on. And the world I had walked into that morning rearranged itself one more time around me. This was not a ghost story I was chasing. This was a real place, with real people, who had known a real man. Wren Ashby put the truck in gear and pulled back onto the road. She did not say much for a long time, and I did not ask the questions that were screaming inside my head. I think she knew I could not have heard the answers yet. We drove. The asphalt turned to gravel under the tires. The houses got further and further apart. We passed a barn with a tin roof and one lit window in the loft. We passed a fence with a red mailbox at the end of it. We passed a field with 2 horses standing under a single tree, their heads down against the rain. And then after a long while, she slowed the truck and pointed. "There," she said, "end of the lane." I almost missed it. It was barely a road. 2 rotting wooden posts on either side of a dirt track, the kind of posts that might have held a gate once a long time ago. The track itself disappeared into a wall of overgrown blackberry canes and ferns and small wet trees. Wren put the truck in park, but she did not turn off the engine. "You sure you want to be here, honey?" she asked. I looked down that dark, narrow lane. I thought about the hard plastic bench at the bus station, about Mrs. Eldridge's beige office, about the list of shelters folded inside my backpack, about the room I had slept in last night that someone else would be sleeping in tomorrow. I thought about the Bible in the box behind me. "I have to be," I said. Ren nodded. She did not argue. She did not try to change my mind. She reached across me and opened her glove compartment and pulled out a small, heavy black flashlight and a slip of paper. She pressed both of them into my hand. "Power's been off out there for years," she said. "You take this. Number on the paper is mine. I live a mile back the way we came. White house with the red roof. Anything happens, anything at all, you call. Or you walk." "Thank you, Ren." She held my eyes for a second. "Your father was a good man, Marin," she said. "Whatever else they told you. You remember that." I could not answer. I just nodded. I picked up my backpack. I climbed out of the truck. I lifted the box of my father's things out of the bed. She watched me until I had reached the mouth of the lane. Then she lifted a hand off the wheel in a small wave, and she rolled away down the gravel road, and the sound of her engine was swallowed by the trees. The silence she left behind was deeper than any silence I had ever stood inside. I stood there for a long moment at the head of that lane, the rain plastering my hair to my forehead, the box heavy against my hip. And then I started walking. The lane was less a road than a memory of one. The blackberry canes reached out and snagged my jacket. The ground was soft and spongy under my feet, soaked years of fallen needles and leaves into a kind of damp carpet. The air smelled of wet earth and rotting wood and cedar. The light from the gray sky barely reached down through the canopy. It was like walking into a green cathedral that had been left to grow over its own pews. After about 100 yards, the lane opened into a clearing, and there it was. It was not a ruin. Not exactly. It was still standing. A simple 2-story house of dark, weathered wood, set back in the clearing like a shy thing that had been waiting to be seen. The porch roof sagged in the middle where one of the support posts had rotted out at the base. The windows were dark and grimy and blank. One of the upstairs panes was broken, a jagged hole gaping open to the rain. A massive climbing rose, long since gone wild, had taken half of the front wall, its thorny branches reaching up under the eaves like fingers trying to pull the house down by the rafters. To the left of the house stood the barn, bigger than the house. Its roofline still straight and true, though some of the vertical planks had warped and pulled away from the studs. A weather vane on the cupola had stopped pointing anywhere a long time ago. The whole place was a study in slow surrender, of nature patiently, kindly, without malice, taking back what had been borrowed from it. And yet, standing there in the rain, looking up at that crooked porch and that broken window and that wild rose, I felt something I did not expect to feel. I felt that this place had been loved once. I felt it had been loved hard. And I felt that the love was still in the woods somewhere, the way the smell of cedar had still been in my father's Bible. I climbed the 3 rickety steps to the porch. I tested each one with my weight before committing. The boards groaned under me, but they held. The front door was solid oak, painted dark green long ago. The paint was peeling in long curls. The brass knob was tarnished black. I tried it. Locked, of course. I peered through the grimy front window. I could just make out in the gloom the ghostly shapes of furniture under white sheets, a room full of sleeping giants. I walked around the side of the house. I tried a side door that led into what looked like a mudroom. Locked. I circled the whole house in the rain. Every door, every window on the ground floor sealed up tight. My father, whatever else he had been, had built this place to keep things out. I stood at the back of the house with the rain running down my neck, and I felt the old familiar feeling rising in me. The feeling of having come a long way for nothing. The feeling of being shut out. I leaned my back against the wall. I closed my eyes for a second, and when I opened them again, I was looking at the chimney. It was a fieldstone chimney. River rock and granite mortared together by some patient hand many years ago. It ran up the side of the house from a wide base. There was a stone near the bottom of it that didn't look quite right. It was the right size, the right color, but the mortar around it looked a little cleaner than the mortar around the other stones, a little newer, as if once upon a time someone had taken it out and put it back, and then someone had taken it out and put it back again, and again, until the mortar around that one stone was younger than the rest of the chimney. I knelt down in the wet grass. I pressed my hand flat against the stone. I pushed. It did not move. I worked my fingers into the seam at the top of it. I wiggled it. I pushed and I pulled. And slowly, like something giving up a very old secret, the stone shifted. I pulled it free. It was heavier than I expected. I set it down in the grass beside me, and I leaned forward and I looked into the dark cavity in the chimney where the stone had been. There was a small metal box wedged inside, rust pocked, the size of a paperback book. I reached in and I pulled it out. It was a cash box, the cheap kind with a flimsy lock on the front. I tried the lid. It was locked. I picked up the stone I had pulled out of the chimney, and I brought it down on the lock once, then twice. On the third strike, the latch gave way with a small, clean snap. I lifted the lid. Inside, on a bed of what looked like dried moss, someone had carefully packed into the bottom of the box was a single iron key. It was not a modern key. It was old, heavy, a circular head, a long shaft, complicated teeth. The kind of key you read about in old books. The kind of key that opens a door in a fairy tale. I picked it up. It was cold against my palm. I stood up slowly. My knees ached. My jeans were soaked through. But I did not feel the cold anymore. I walked back around to the front of the house. I climbed the 3 steps. I stood in front of the green door with my father's iron key in my hand, and for a moment I could not move. This was the door he had built. This was the lock he had set into it. And he had hidden the key for me. I slid the iron key into the lock. It was a perfect fit. I turned it. Inside the door, deep inside the wood, a heavy bolt slid back with a long, satisfied clunk. The kind of sound a thing makes when it has been waiting a long time to be opened, and is glad finally to be opened. I turned the knob. The door swung inward on hinges that had not moved in 20 years. They protested. They sighed. They complained. And then they let the door swing wide. The air that came out to meet me was cold, musty, heavy with the smell of trapped time. Old wood, old paper, old wool, and underneath all of it, very faintly, that thread of cedar. I switched on Wren's flashlight. The beam cut into the dark of my father's house. I stepped across the threshold. The light played over a room frozen in amber. Dust hung in the air in long, slow drifts. Every shape under every white sheet was dim to a ghost. A pair of muddy work boots stood by the door just where their owner had left them. A heavy canvas coat hung from a peg on the wall. I walked slowly down a short hallway. My footsteps echoed on the floorboards. The flashlight found a kitchen, a kettle on the stove, a mug on the counter with the dried brown ring of an old coffee at the bottom of it, a jar of instant beside it. The contents shrunk and darkened with age. I walked on. I found a small office off the living room. Unlike the other rooms I had passed, this one had not been covered. The sheets had been pulled off the furniture, or never put on. A wooden desk stood beneath a window with a chair tucked neatly under it. A fountain pen lay on a clean blotter. A single book lay open on the desk, face down, as if someone had set it down for a moment and meant to come right back to it. The flashlight moved past the desk, up the wall above it, and it stopped. The beam shook. It steadied. It shook again. The whole wall above the desk was a corkboard, and the corkboard was covered in pictures of a child, a baby with no hair asleep on a blanket, a toddler in a red coat reaching up toward a hand that was not in the frame, a little girl with a missing front tooth holding up a paper certificate, a school photo, 2nd grade, a girl in a blue sweater smiling carefully at the camera. I knew those pictures. I knew that girl. I had been that girl. And on the corkboard in between the pictures were folded squares of newsprint, clippings from local papers, honor rolls, a grainy photograph from a youth soccer league, captions, names circled in blue ink. My name, circled in blue ink, over and over. He had been watching. The man I had been told didn't care. The man the world had said died with nothing. He had been watching me. He had been keeping a record. He had been loving me from a distance in this small, dark room in this silent house on this lonely piece of land for every one of those first 8 years before the world told me he was gone. The flashlight beam fell from my hand. It rolled across the floor. The light spun once, twice, and came to rest, pointing at the wall, throwing its long, pale shape up against the photographs of a girl who had grown up believing nobody had been looking. I sank down into my father's chair, and in that dusty office, in that house in the woods at the end of a road I had not even known existed, 2 days before 18 years old, and 1,000 miles from anything I could call mine, I put my face into my hands, and for the first time in my life, I cried for the father I had not lost. I cried for the father who had been here all along. I do not know how long I sat there. I sat. The flashlight lay where I had dropped it. Its beam had rolled and settled, throwing a long, pale shape up the wall, lighting the photographs from below, the way a candle lights a face at a wake. My breath made small clouds in the cool air of the room. My hands shook in my lap. My chest hurt the way a chest hurts when something inside it is being rearranged. I had walked into that house an orphan. I was sitting in it now as a daughter. The two are not the same thing. I want you to understand that. An orphan is a person who has been left. A daughter is a person who has been kept. For 10 years, I had thought I was the first. In 1 minute, in front of a corkboard in a dusty room, I had been told I was the second. And the world had to be taken apart and put back together to make room for that. The crying came in waves. It would let me up. I would draw a long, shaky breath. I would think I had finished. And then my eyes would catch another photograph. A first day of kindergarten. A Christmas pageant where I had played a sheep. A picture of me at 6, sitting on a curb with a popsicle taken from across a street I had not known my father had been standing on. And it would start again. After a long while, the wave passed and did not come back. I sat empty, hollowed out. The way a man feels after he has worked all night on a thing he cannot fix and has finally set the wrench down. I picked up the flashlight from the floor. I sat back in my father's chair, and I let the beam move slowly down from the corkboard, down the wall to the surface of the desk in front of me. There was a book lying face down on the blotter. I lifted it. It was a guide to building post and beam barns. A receipt was tucked into it as a bookmark. The receipt was 20 years old. It was from a hardware store in a town I did not know. I set the book aside. There was a fountain pen on the blotter, black. The cap screwed on. I picked it up. It was heavy in my hand. The kind of pen a man buys once and uses for the rest of his life. And there, beside the pen set neatly against the back edge of the desk where my eyes had not gone the first time, was a small wooden box. It was not big, about the size of a paperback book. It was made of pale wood sanded so smooth it seemed almost soft. The grain ran in long, quiet lines along the lid, and there, set into the corner, was a small inlay of a darker wood, a single five-pointed star, no bigger than a thumbprint. It was a cedar box. I knew before I touched it. I knew before I lifted the lid. I knew this was what I had come for. I set the flashlight on the desk so that its beam pointed up at the ceiling and lit the room with a soft, indirect light. I set my hands flat on the desk for a moment, the way a man sets his hands on a table before he stands up to say something hard. Then I lifted the lid of the cedar box. The smell that came up out of it was clean and bright. Cedar and a hint of something else, something dry and herbal. He had laid a sprig of dried lavender in there a long time ago. The flowers were dust now, but the scent of them had stayed. Inside the box, on a bed of faded blue velvet, were two things. The first was a small stack of envelopes tied together with a piece of brown twine. The second was a cassette tape recorder, old, the kind I had seen in movies, with a single tape inside it. The tape had a paper label on the side, and on the label, in the same neat block handwriting that had written his name, in the front of the Bible, was a single word: Marin. I picked up the recorder first. It was heavier than I expected. The plastic was scuffed and yellowed with age. I held it for a moment in both hands. I could feel the shape of his hands on it, the way his fingers had held it once, the way his thumb had pressed the red record button, and then later on some other day he had pressed stop, and he had set it down in this box, and he had closed the lid. I set it back on the velvet. I was not ready for that yet. I picked up the stack of envelopes. The top one was cream-colored, heavy paper, not the thin, cheap envelopes from the group home. Across the front of it, in his hand, were the words, "For Marin, on her 18th birthday." I read it twice. The second time I had to set the envelope down on the desk, because my hands were shaking too badly to hold it. He had known. He had known I would find this room. He had known I would find this desk. He had known I would lift this lid. He had set this letter here on velvet in cedar sealed in cream, and then he had walked out of this house and lived the rest of his short life, trusting that one day I would walk in and pick it up. He had bet everything he had on that. On me. I picked up the envelope again. I slit the seal with my thumbnail. Inside was a single sheet of paper folded twice. I unfolded it. The handwriting filled the page, front and back, tight and careful, the way a man writes when he is trying to fit a great deal of life into a small space. The letter was dated 2 weeks before the day they had told me he died. 2 weeks. He had written this knowing his time was running out. I started to read. He began with 2 words I had never been called by another human being: my dearest Marin. And just like that, the wave came up again. I held the page against my chest, and I cried for a minute more. Then I steadied myself, and I pulled the page back, and I read on. He told me in that letter that if I was reading it, 2 things were true. The first was that he was gone. He was sorry for it. He was sorry in a way that did not have words big enough to hold it. He said that the thought of leaving me alone in this world was the only thing in his life that had ever truly frightened him. The second was that I had found my way home, and that, he said, gave him a peace he could not describe. home. He called this place home. He went on. He said he knew the story I had been told about him. A man who lived and died without leaving much of a mark. A drifter. A logger. A name on a death certificate. He said it had been important for a long time that the world believed that story. He said it had been the only way he could keep me safe. He said it was time I knew the truth. He told me about his own father, a hard man. He told me about the company that hard man had kept, and about the company a young man falls into when he is trying to prove himself to a hard father. He told me he had made mistakes when he was young and stupid. He had run with men he should not have run with. He had owed money to men who did not write polite letters when they wanted it back. He told me in plain words about debt that could not be paid in dollars. And then he said I had been born. He wrote about the first time he had held me in his arms. He wrote about it the way a man writes about a thing he has looked at every day for years and never gotten used to. He wrote that holding me had killed the man he had been, and left in his place a man he did not yet know how to be. He could not let that life touch mine. So he ran. He took me and we disappeared. He changed his name. He took jobs that paid in cash. He moved every few months. He did not stay in any one place long enough for the men he had owed to find a thread to pull. He told me in his own words that we had lived for years like a pair of ghosts, and all that time he had been saving. Every dollar he could put aside, he had put aside. Not in a bank, not where a name could be traced. He had put it away in coffee cans and floorboards, and the linings of old jackets in cabins and motel rooms up and down the coast. He had a dream, he told me. A dream of a place so far back in the trees that nobody who was looking for him would ever think to look. A place where he could set me down and let me grow. He had bought this land he wrote under his real name, the only clean thing he had left from his old life. He had built this house with his own 2 hands. Weekends, vacations, long stretches of time he had told employers he was visiting family he did not have. He had felled some of the timber himself. He had set the foundation stones himself. Every nail in this house had gone in under the weight of a hammer. He had swung with my name in his head. He told me he had dreamed of bringing me here. He had dreamed of teaching me the names of the trees. He had dreamed of showing me the stars from the porch. He had dreamed of teaching me to drive on the gravel road that ran behind the back 40. I read those lines twice. I had not known my father had dreamed any of those dreams. The world had told me he had not dreamed at all. And then partway down the back of the page, the tone of the letter changed. He told me in 2 short sentences that they had found him. The past, he wrote, has a long reach. They had gotten word that he had a daughter. They were going to use me to get to him. He had been given a choice, he wrote. He could run again. But they would always be looking now. They would find us again and again, and the running would never end. And one day it would be me on the wrong end of it, not him. Or he could end it. He could pay the debt one last time. He could pay it with the only thing he had left that was worth what he owed. He could pay it with his life. He had arranged the accident, he wrote, the way a man arranges any other piece of work he intends to do well. He had paid off the right people. He had made the story convincing. He had made a deal. A final settlement. A clean break. The debt closed forever in a way that could not be reopened. The connection between his old life and my future severed at the trunk. It had cost him everything he had. It had cost him his life. I sat in his chair in the cool, dark room and I read those words and I could not breathe for a long time. My father had not died in an accident. My father had given his life for mine. He had walked into a death he had built with his own 2 hands, the same hands that had built this house, so that the men who would have come for me could close their book on him and forget us both. He had done it on a date he had chosen. He had paid in advance, and then he had set down the letter on this desk, and he had set the cassette beside it, and he had closed the lid on a cedar box, and he had walked out of his house for the last time. I will not tell you exactly what that knowledge did to me. There are things that happen inside a person that the words have not been invented for. I will tell you only that I sat very still for a long time, and that the silence in that house, which had felt heavy when I had walked in, now felt holy, the way a chapel feels. The letter went on. He said the only thing he had not been able to part with was this land. He said his only regret was that he could not leave me with more. There was no money in any account he wrote. The accounts had been part of the deal. He had to trust the system to take care of me, which had been. He wrote the hardest thing he had ever done. He had to trust that one day I would be old enough and stubborn enough to handle the truth. He had set it up, he said, so that the box of his things would be released to me on the day I turned 18. He had hoped I would find the deed. He had hoped I would be brave enough to come. He had bet on me. The letter ended. It ended this way. This house, this land, it is everything I have to give you. It is in rough shape by now. There will be back taxes. There will be trouble. People will try to take it from you. But it is yours. It was paid for with love and hope. What you do with it is your choice. You can sell it. You can walk away. There is no shame in that. Or you can stay. You can make it the home I always dreamed it would be for you. The choice is yours. It is the only real gift I have to give you. A choice. Whatever you decide, know this. I have loved you every second of every day. Be brave, my Myron. Be happy. Your father. Silas. I folded the letter the way he had folded it, twice. I slid it back into the cream envelope. I set the envelope on the velvet beside the cassette recorder. I sat in the cool dark for a long time. I was not crying anymore. I was past crying. I was somewhere on the other side of crying, in the place where the world is very still and very simple, and you can see the shape of it clearly for a few minutes before the noise comes back. I had been given a choice for the first time in my life. A real one. I stood up from the desk. My legs were stiff. My back ached. The box of his things was still on the floor where I had set it down. The Bible was still on the desk. The flashlight was burning a little dimmer than it had been an hour ago. I picked up the flashlight and I walked out of the office. I needed to see the rest of the house. I climbed the stairs slowly. The treads creaked under my weight. The banister was smooth oak. He had sanded it by hand. I could feel the long, even strokes of his sanding in the wood. There was a small worn place halfway up where his thumb must have rested when he climbed. The upstairs hallway was short. 2 doors, one on each side. I opened the door on the right first. It was a bedroom. His. I knew it was his before I had taken a single step inside. A simple iron bed frame with no headboard. A handmade dresser. A single chair by the window. A pair of jeans hung from a peg in the closet. A flannel shirt hung beside them. The pattern faded almost out of the fabric. I walked over to the closet. I touched the sleeve of the flannel. Cedar. And something else very faint. The smell of a man who had worked outdoors. The smell of pine sap and wood smoke and the underside of a hat brim. The smell I had buried 10 years ago in the back of my mind, so I would not miss it. It came up out of that flannel sleeve as if it had been waiting for me. I closed my eyes. I did not move for a long time. When I came out of his room, I crossed the hall and put my hand on the second door. I knew before I opened it what I was going to find. I think part of me had known from the moment I had stepped over the threshold downstairs. I opened the door. The room was small, square, a single window at the far end looking out at the dark wall of the forest. The walls were painted a clean pale yellow, the yellow of a kitchen at sunrise, the yellow of a coat on a child small enough to need help with the buttons. He had painted them carefully. The brushwork was even. The corners were neat. He had taken his time. In the center of the floor, alone in a clean square of empty boards, stood a wooden rocking horse. It was hand-carved. The wood was a warm honey color, sanded so smooth that even from across the room I could tell he had finished it with his palm at the end, the way you finish a piece you love. The mane and tail were rope neatly braided and cut to length. The eyes were small carved circles, painted with a careful brown that had a hint of warmth in it, as if he had been thinking when he painted them of the eyes he hoped his daughter would have. I crossed the room. I knelt down beside the horse. I ran my hand along its back. The grain of the wood ran in long, quiet lines under my fingers. I touched the mane. I touched the carved curve of the neck. There were small file marks on the underside of the belly where his hands had not quite reached with the sandpaper. He had been a man, after all, not a magician. Just a man who had spent his weekends in a barn carving a horse for a child who had not yet been born. I sat down on the floor beside it. I leaned my head against its side, and I whispered into the painted wood of a horse my father had carved for a daughter he had not lived to give it. To the only thing I could think to say, "I am here, Daddy. I am here." The afternoon moved through the window without me noticing. The flashlight beam grew dimmer. The light beyond the glass began to thin from gray into something darker. I was hungry. I was cold. I had not eaten since the bus station that morning. I made myself stand up. There was more to see. I went back downstairs. I went out the side door into the wet yard. The rain had stopped. A weak gray light hung over the clearing. I could see now what I had not been able to see in the rain. The orchard at the far end of the property, the trees gone wild with their own fruit. The vegetable garden choked with blackberry. A line of fence posts along the property line, half of them leaning some of them down. And the barn. The barn was bigger than the house. Older, too, I thought. He must have built it first, used it as a workshop while he raised the house out of nothing. The big sliding door was held shut by a simple iron latch. No lock. I pulled the door open. It rolled along its track with a low rumble that seemed to wake up something inside me. The smell that came out of the barn was nothing like the smell of the house. It was the smell of long dry hay and old grease and oiled steel. The smell of a place where a man had worked. I stepped inside. He had organized everything. That was the first thing I saw. The whole back wall of the barn was a pegboard the size of a wall in a small house, and every inch of it had been hung with tools. Hammers in 3 sizes, saws, levels, chisels and planes and drills, wrenches in graduated rows, a long shelf at the bottom with cans of nails and screws sorted by size. Each tool had been hung on its own peg. Each peg had been outlined in black marker on the pegboard, so that even with the tools off the wall you could see where each one was supposed to go, so that nothing would ever be lost. He had thought of everything. In the center of the floor under a tarp, a stack of lumber stood waiting. I lifted the corner of the tarp, 2x4s, 6x6s, long pieces of cedar siding, a small fortune in dry milled wood. He had bought it. He had stacked it. He had covered it, and he had left it for me. In the corner on a pallet sat an old generator, the kind with a pull cord. A red gas can stood beside it. I crouched down and lifted the can. Empty. I'd expected nothing else. The fuel would have gone bad 20 years ago anyway, but the machine itself sat there clean under a thin film of dust, the way a man leaves a thing he has used and means to use again. I straightened up. I let the flashlight play around the edges of the room, and the beam caught on something in the back corner. It was tucked in behind a pile of old tarps, half hidden under a wooden crate that someone had stacked on top of it. I had not seen it on the first sweep. I would not have seen it now if the beam had not slid across the corner of it just so. It was a footlocker, a green metal footlocker, the kind men used to bring home from the service. Old, heavy. There were no markings on it, no name stenciled on the lid. It was just a plain green box with a bowed top sitting in the back corner of my father's barn under a pile of canvas and silence. I dragged it out into the open. It was heavy. Whatever was inside, he had not packed it light. I worked it across the barn floor until it sat in the middle of the room in the soft light coming in through the open door. There was a combination padlock on the front. The shackle was thick. The dial was worn smooth from someone's thumb. It was a serious lock, not the cheap kind you put on a school locker. It was the kind a man uses when he means to keep something safe for a long time. I knelt down beside it. I did not have any tools that would break this lock. I could go back to the house, find a hammer, try to smash it, but I knew I would only hurt myself doing it. He had used a real lock for a reason. He had used a real lock because he had meant for me to open it the right way. I sat back on my heels. He had hidden the deed in the Bible. He had hidden the iron key in the chimney. He had hidden a letter in a cedar box on his desk. He had not done any of it by accident. Every step had been a step. Every lock had a key. Every key had been left where it could be found by the right person at the right time. The combination had to be somewhere. I closed my eyes. I thought about the Bible. I had been so taken by the deed inside it that I had not really looked at the book itself. I had opened it to the front. I had read his name. I had read the date. The date he had written under his name. The date of my birth. I sat in the dirt of the barn, and I tried to picture that page, the way the pen had moved, the way the numbers had stood on the page. And in my mind's eye, very faintly, I saw something I had not really seen the first time. 3 small marks under the date. 3 little points like pinpricks. I had thought, if I had thought anything at all, that they were just dents in the paper. Small flaws. Now I was not so sure. I stood up. I went back into the house. I climbed the stairs to the office. I picked the Bible up from the desk. I carried it back down through the kitchen and out into the yard and across the muddy ground to the barn, and I knelt down beside the footlocker, and I opened the Bible to the flyleaf. I held the flashlight close to the page. There they were. 3 small pinpricks, no bigger than the head of a sewing needle, almost invisible against the cream of the paper. They had been pressed in from the back gently, so that they raised 3 small bumps on the side that had his name on it. I tilted the book. The pinpricks fell one by one under the digits of the date he had written. The first prick was under the first number of the month. The second was under the first number of the day. The third was under the second number of the day. My birthday is the 15th of July. 7, 1, 5. It was a long shot. It was the kind of long shot that lives in stories. But it was the only shot I had, and it was a shot he had given me. I set the Bible down on the floor of the barn open to the page. the way you would set a map down beside you when you were trying to find your way home. I dialed the lock. 715. I pulled on the shackle. It opened. I sat for a second with the open lock in my hand, and I laughed. A short, half-broken laugh. The kind of laugh that comes up out of you when something has just happened that you would not have believed if a stranger had told it to you. He had left me a trail of breadcrumbs. He had laid them down 20 years ago, and he had trusted that one day his daughter would be hungry enough to follow them. I lifted the lid of the footlocker. I do not know what I had expected. I had been bracing myself for the worst, for weapons, for stacks of money I should not have, for the part of his old life he had told me about in the letter, the part with the men who broke things. I had thought all the way across that barn that this was where the dark side of my father lived. What I found inside the footlocker was different. It was full of books, not paperbacks like the ones in the box from the group home, not poetry. These were textbooks. Thick, serious, hard-bound textbooks. Their covers were faded, but their spines were uncracked. He had bought them, and he had not used them yet. I lifted the top one out. It was a manual on agricultural science. The next one down was a book on small flock poultry. Beneath that, soil management, crop rotation, beekeeping, orchard care, small-scale forestry. Below the agriculture books was a layer on construction, wiring a country house, plumbing for the homeowner, foundations and framing. Below those was a layer on small engine repair, generator maintenance, tractor mechanics. He had built himself a school. He had built himself a school for a future he was not going to see. He had been getting ready to teach me. I stared down into that box for a long time. There was so much paper in it, so many pages he had bought and stacked and never gotten the chance to open beside me at a kitchen table on a winter night. So many lessons he had meant to give me gone now into the silence that had followed him. But here they were. He had not been able to give them to me with his voice. So he had given them to me with his hands. On top of the books, lying flat against the inside of the lid, was a single envelope. It was smaller than the first one. The paper was the same cream. The handwriting was the same. Across the front, in his neat block letters, were 3 words. If you stayed. I lifted it out. I sat down on the floor of the barn with my back against the footlocker. The way a man sits down when he has been working hard for a long time and can finally stop for a minute. I opened the envelope. I unfolded the page inside. The letter was short. He wrote that if I was reading this, I had not walked away. He said he had known I would not. He said I had his stubbornness. He said I also had his hope. He said he had never gotten the chance to be a farmer, but that he had studied. He had read every one of the books in this box. He had taken notes in the margins. He had folded the corners of pages he wanted to come back to. He had marked the chapters that mattered most. This box, he wrote, was his manual for the home he had not lived to make. It was in his own words the way to build a life on this land. And then at the bottom of the page, he had written one more thing. Look under the floorboards in your room, under the rocking horse. There is one last piece. It is the part that will let you fight for this place. I love you, Dad. I sat there for a long minute with the letter in my lap and the smell of cedar and dry hay all around me. Then I stood up. I walked back across the yard. I climbed the porch steps. I went up the stairs of my father's house. I went into the small yellow room. The rocking horse stood where I had left it, in the middle of the bare board floor. I looked at the boards under the horse. The flashlight beam moved over them. There was one board right under the curve of the runner that was a little shorter than the others, just a hand span. The cut was clean. The seam was tight, but it was there. He had not hidden it cleverly. He had hidden it just well enough that a stranger would not see, but just plainly enough that his daughter would. I went back down to the barn. I came back with a flat-bladed pry bar from his pegboard. I knelt down beside the horse. I worked the blade into the seam. The old wood groaned. The nails screamed. And then, with a long, slow protest, the board came up. I lifted it free. I shone the light into the dark space below. A metal box looked back up at me, bigger than the cash box from the chimney. Sturdier. Painted black, the paint chipped at the corners. No lock. Just a simple metal latch. I lifted it out. It was heavy. It took both of my hands. I set it on the floor beside the rocking horse, and I knelt over it for a moment without opening it the way a man might kneel beside a thing he has been looking for his whole life. I lifted the latch. I opened the lid. The box was full of money. Stacks and stacks of bills bundled in paper bands. Old bills, some of them. Smaller bills, 20s and 50s mostly. The bands had the names of small banks on them. Banks I did not recognize. Banks scattered up and down the coast. He had not kept it in any one place. He had not trusted any one institution with it. He had moved it slowly, dollar by dollar, from his pockets into this box over years. On top of the money, lying flat against the bills, was a single piece of paper. It was a tax assessment from the county. Old, 20 years old. Folded once. He had circled the annual property tax in red ink, and beside the circled number in his careful handwriting was a column. It was a ledger. Year by year going forward from the date of the assessment, he had calculated the projected property tax on this land. He had added the estimated penalties. He had added compounding interest. He had done the math out year by year in neat columns for 17 years past. The day he had written down the first number, at the bottom of the column was a total, $87,452. I sat back on my heels in that small yellow room. He had not just left me a house. He had not just left me a barn. He had not just left me a ledger of love and a horse he had carved with his own hands. He had left me the weapon I would need to keep all of it. He had known they would come for me. The man who used paper instead of fists. The man who used auctions instead of debt collectors. He had known the law would be the next door they tried after the first door had closed. And he had spent the last years of his life making sure that when they came, his daughter would not be empty-handed. He had given me in cash with his own hand a fighting chance. I closed the lid of the box. I sat in the middle of that small yellow room with the rocking horse beside me and the iron key in my pocket, and the cedar box downstairs on his desk, and his flannel shirt hanging in his closet across the hall, and his money in my lap. For the first time since I had been 8 years old, I was not alone. For the first time in my life, I knew what I wanted to do. I was going to keep this place. I did not know how. I did not know what I was going to face. I did not know what the next 2 weeks were going to ask of me. But I knew with a certainty that had grown straight up out of the floor of that yellow room that I was not selling. I was not running. I was not leaving. I was staying. I closed the box. I locked it. I stood up. In the morning, I told myself I would walk down to the White House with the red roof a mile back the way I had come. I would knock on Wren Ashby's door. I would ask to use her phone. I would call the courthouse. I would call the county. I would find out exactly what I was up against. I did not know it yet, standing there in that small yellow room. But the people on the other end of those phone lines were already moving. The papers had already been filed. The bid had already been made. Strangers in suits in offices 3 counties away had already drawn a line through this land on a map and put my father's name beneath it and written next to that name the word deceased. And they were already counting the days until they could put their own name there instead. In 2 weeks by their calendar, this place would belong to them. In 2 weeks by mine, it was going to belong to me. I picked up the box of money. I picked up the flashlight. I walked out of my father's room down the stairs into the kitchen. And I sat down at the table where he had once sat alone with a mug of instant coffee and a quiet head full of dreams, and I waited for morning. Morning came slowly to that house. I had not slept. I had pulled one of the white sheets off a chair in the living room and wrapped it around my shoulders, and I had sat at the kitchen table with the flashlight set on its end, throwing a small column of light up at the ceiling. I had watched the dark in the windows turn from black to charcoal, to the soft pewter gray of a wet morning in the Cascades. I had watched the shapes of trees come back to the world outside one by one, as if a hand were drawing them in with a pencil. When the light was strong enough to see by, I stood up. My back hurt. My legs hurt. My eyes felt like they had been rubbed with sand. But there was a clarity in me that I had not felt the day before. The grief had not gone. It had only stepped aside the way grief does, to let the work begin. I cleaned myself up at the hand pump out back. The water came out rusty, and I let it run for a long minute until it ran clear and cold. I splashed it on my face. I rinsed my mouth. I tied my hair back. I changed into the cleanest shirt I had in my backpack. I packed 3 things into my bag: the deed, the ledger from under the floorboards, the black metal box of bills. I did not like carrying that much money on me, but I liked the idea of leaving it behind in an empty house even less. He had moved it carefully all those years ago from one hiding place to another. I would carry it carefully now. I locked the front door behind me with the iron key. I knelt down at the chimney and slid the stone back into place. I straightened up. I looked at the house for a moment in the pale morning light. The crooked porch, the wild rose, the broken upstairs window. It looked to me less like a ruin than it had the day before. It looked like a thing that had been waiting. I started walking down the lane. The mile to the White House with the red roof was easier than the mile in. The rain had stopped. The road was firmer underfoot. The trees dripped, but the sky between them was lightening. By the time I came around the last bend and saw Wren Ashby's place, smoke was rising from the chimney in a thin, steady line. She came out onto the porch before I had finished crossing the yard, a mug in her hand. She did not look surprised. She looked like a woman who had been expecting me. "You look about how I figured you'd look," she said. "Come on in." She sat me down in her kitchen. She put a plate in front of me. 2 eggs, bacon, a piece of toast, a glass of milk. I had not eaten in almost a full day, and when I tasted that food, I almost cried again in a different way than I had been crying. She let me eat. She did not ask questions. When I was done, she took the plate to the sink and she came back with a cordless phone in her hand, the kind that had a little antenna you pulled up out of the top. "You said you needed to make some calls," she said. "I do." "You take all the time you need," she said. "I'll be out back." She went out the kitchen door and I heard the soft squelch of her boots on the wet grass, and I was alone. My first call was to Mrs. Eldridge. It went to her voicemail the way I had figured it would. I left her a message. I told her I was safe. I told her I was not in Portland. I told her I was at my father's property and that the property was real and that I was going to need help. I told her I needed a lawyer who knew the difference between right and not right. I gave her Wren's number. My second call was to the county tax office. The number was on the assessment from the floorboards. A woman picked up on the 3rd ring. Her voice was bored and a little tired. the voice of a person who has been answering the same questions for 30 years in the same chair. I told her my name. I told her the address. I told her I was the daughter of the owner and that I needed to know the status of the property. She put me on hold for a long minute. When she came back, her voice was different, softer. "Oh, honey," she said. I waited. "That parcel is on the auction block," she said. "The redemption sale is in 2 weeks." I closed my eyes. I had known. Standing in that small yellow room the night before with the ledger in my lap, I had known. But knowing a thing in your bones is different from hearing a stranger say it out loud. "How much is owed?" I asked. She read it off slowly. 17 years of unpaid taxes, penalties, interest. The number she gave me was $87,512 and change. It was almost exactly the number on my father's ledger. The man had been off by about $60 over 17 years. I think in that moment, that small failure of his arithmetic moved me as much as anything else he had done. "What if I can pay the full amount?" I said. "You'd have to be the legal heir," she said. "Property's still in your father's name. To redeem it, you have to prove succession. That goes through probate." "How long does probate take?" 6 months, she said. "Sometimes 9. Depends on the county." I had 2 weeks. The trap clicked shut around me as cleanly as a footlocker. She must have heard it in my breathing. Her voice got a little lower, a little more careful. "Listen, honey," she said. "There's another thing you should know. There is a pre-auction bidder on the file. A development company, Strout Ridge Holdings. They have already made an offer, and they have been buying up parcels all over that side of the county for about 3 years now. Old farms, holdouts, mill land. They are very, very motivated." The name landed in me like a stone dropped into a still pond. Strout Ridge. I thanked her. I hung up the phone. I sat at Wren's kitchen table for a long minute with my hands flat on the wood. I did not know yet, sitting there, exactly what Strout Ridge was. I only knew the way an animal knows a shape in the brush. That the men in suits I had been bracing for were already at the door. The screen door creaked. Wren came back in. She looked at my face. "Bad news," she said. It was not a question. I told her everything. She listened. She did not interrupt. When I got to the 87,000 on the ledger and the 87,000 on the file, she went very still. "He always was good at his numbers," she said quietly. I opened my backpack on her kitchen table. I showed her the ledger. I showed her the box. She did not gasp. She did not act surprised. She just looked at it for a long moment, and then she looked up at me, and her bright blue eyes had something fierce in them. "Probate court in the city takes 6 months," she said. "Stillwater isn't the city. We have a county judge here. Thaddeus Vale, 40-some years on the bench. He knew your father. He knew him. Hired him to put a new roof on his stable," she said. "Paid in cash. Said your father did the best work he ever saw a man do. That was 20 years ago. Judge Vale does not forget." She tapped her finger on the table. "He holds court tomorrow," she said. "I know his clerk. I'm going to make a phone call." The next 24 hours were a blur. Wren made me sleep on her couch under a quilt that smelled like cedar and dried rosemary. She fed me again that night. Stew, cornbread. She did not talk much. She let me sit. In the morning, she handed me a clean shirt that had been her granddaughter's and a denim jacket that fit close enough. She drove me 30 miles to the county seat in her old blue Ford. The courthouse was a two-story brick building with white pillars set on a small green lawn. It smelled inside of floor wax and old paper. Every footstep echoed. Judge Thaddeus Vale held court in his chambers, not in the room with the bench. The chambers were small and warm. Books on the walls floor to ceiling. A heavy oak desk. A reading lamp with a green glass shade. He was a big man, bald, a face that looked at first like an old bulldog's face. Heavy jaw, heavy brow. But when he looked up from his desk and saw me, the eyes under the heavy brow were not a bulldog's eyes. They were the eyes of a man who had spent 40 years watching people lie to him from across a courtroom and had gotten very good at telling who was telling the truth. He motioned me to a chair. I sat. Wren sat beside me. I told him my story. I had thought it would be hard to tell it in front of a stranger in a room where every word was being weighed. It wasn't hard. The story had grown so big inside me in the last 2 days that it almost told itself once I opened my mouth. I laid the deed on his desk. I laid the Bible beside it open to the flyleaf. With my father's handwriting, I laid my birth certificate beside the Bible. I laid the cream envelope beside the birth certificate. He read the letter slowly. His big hands held the paper carefully, the way a man holds a thing he understands the weight of. When he was done, he folded it the way it had been folded. He set it on his desk. He leaned back. The chair creaked. "I remember your father," he said. His voice was a low rumble that seemed to come up out of the floor. Silas Holloway. Did some work on my barn the summer of 2004. Solid man. Honest work. Paid him the day I hired him because he asked me to. Said he did not keep accounts. He looked at me. "Now," he said, "about this development company." I waited. "I've had my eye on Strout Ridge Holdings for 6 years," he said. "They have been using the back tax auction system to pick up family ground for pennies on the dollar. It is legal. Legal is not always the same as right. I've been waiting for a case where the heir actually showed up to fight." He picked up a pen from his desk. He looked at me over it. "The law," he said, "is a tool. A man can use a tool to build. A man can use a tool to break. I prefer the building kind." He scribbled on a piece of paper. He handed it to a woman who had come into the room without my noticing his clerk, a woman in her 50s with a steady hand. She nodded once and walked out. "I am ruling on the strength of the evidence in front of me that you are Marin Holloway, the sole legal heir of Silas Holloway. Your father's letter is, for the purposes of this court, a holographic will. The Bible with your birth date in his hand. The deed in his hand. The birth certificate. It is enough. My clerk will prepare the papers. You will have them by the end of the day." I tried to speak. I could not. "What about probate?" I said finally. He waved the question away the way a man waves away a fly. "Probate is for when the facts are in dispute," he said. "The facts here are clear as creek water. The only thing in dispute is whether this court is going to let a developer who has bought every back tax auction in 3 counties take a good man's daughter to the cleaners. The answer to that, young lady, is no. Not in my courthouse. Not while I am sitting in this chair." He stood up. He was the biggest man I had ever stood up in front of. "You take those papers," he said. "You go to that tax office. You pay what is owed. And then you go home and you make your father proud." I walked out of that courthouse into a sky that had cleared. The clouds had broken. The pavement was still wet, and the light off it was sharp. I held the court order in my hand, and I felt for the first time in 2 days the ground under my feet. Wren and I drove straight to the tax office. I walked up to the same counter to the same clerk I had spoken to on the phone. She looked up when she saw me. I do not think she had expected to see me again. I did not say anything. I slid the court order across the counter. She read it. Her eyebrows went up. "All right, then," she said, softly. I lifted the metal box up onto the counter. I opened it. She was a woman who had worked behind a tax counter for 30 years. She had probably seen everything, but her face changed when she looked into that box. She looked up at me and she looked back down at the money, and she shook her head once. "Honey," she said, "did you carry this in here on the bus?" "I walked in," I said. She laughed. It was a short, surprised laugh. She counted it. It took half an hour. She counted it twice. The final tally was $87,500 even. My father had oversaved by about $300 after penalties were calculated to the day. She stamped my receipt, paid in full. The ink was bright red, and the thump of the stamp on the page was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. I folded the receipt. I put it in the inside pocket of the denim jacket Wren had given me. I walked out of that office a landowner. We drove back up into the mountains as the afternoon was sliding toward evening. The light came down through the firs in long gold bars across the road. Wren did not say much. I did not say much either. There are silences that mean nothing, and there are silences that mean everything, and we were sitting inside the second kind. When we came around the last bend before my lane, both of us saw the truck at the same time. It was a black pickup, newer, shiny. The kind of truck a man buys when he wants to look like he works for a living. It was just pulling out of the mouth of my lane and turning onto the gravel road. As it passed us, I caught the logo on the door. Strout Ridge Holdings. The driver did not look at me. The man in the passenger seat did. He was wearing a suit that had no business out on a wet gravel road. His hair was the color of new pennies. His face was clean-shaven and sharp at the corners. He looked at me the way a hawk looks at something small in the grass. I had never seen him before. I knew his name anyway. He was the man who had been waiting for me to fail. His truck went on past. Wren put her hand on my arm. "Easy," she said. She drove me down the lane. My house came up out of the trees. It looked different to me now. Not crooked, not broken. Just waiting. My house. She let me out at the foot of the porch. She did not get out herself. "I will be back tomorrow with eggs," she said, "and with Cal Boatwright. He is going to want to look at that generator." "Wren," she looked at me. "Thank you." "Honey," she said, "you came home. We have been waiting." She drove away. The sound of her engine faded into the trees. The light turned blue. I climbed the porch steps. I unlocked the green door with the iron key. I stepped into my own house. I did not light a candle that night. I sat in the kitchen in the chair I had sat in the night before, and I did not need a flashlight to know where anything was. The shape of the place had already begun to settle into me. The way the floorboards rose a little near the pantry. The way the window above the sink looked out at the dark line of the firs. The man in the suit came back 2 days later. I had heard his truck a long way off. The gravel of my lane has a particular sound under a wheel that does not belong on it. I had been in the front yard in the garden pulling old blackberry canes by the root. My hands were torn up from the thorns. My jeans were soaked through at the knees. My hair was tied back with a piece of twine I had found in the barn. He stopped his black truck at the edge of the clearing. He got out. He came toward me across the yard in shoes that were the wrong shoes for what was under them. "Miss Holloway," he said. His voice was even, practiced. the voice of a man who had given the same speech in a lot of front yards. "That's me," I said. I did not stop pulling canes. "My name is Lincoln Strout," he said. "I represent Strout Ridge Holdings." I figured. He stopped about 10 feet from me. He looked at the house. He looked at the barn. He looked at the orchard at the back of the property. He took it all in like a man doing math. "You paid the back taxes," he said. "I did." "That was a piece of work," he said. "Court order in less than 48 hours. I've been told that is not how things go. It's how they went." He smiled. It was a thin, polite smile. It did not reach his eyes. "Miss Holloway," he said, "I'm going to be very direct with you. May I?" "Please," I said. "This property has no real value to you," he said. "It is isolated. It needs work. The house needs a new roof. The barn needs new siding. The fences are down. The orchard has gone wild. There is a long, expensive list ahead of you, and you are 18 years old with no income, no resources, and no experience." "That is a lot of words to say I am young," I said. He almost smiled at that. The almost smile was honest. The smile he had walked up with had not been. "Miss Holloway," he said, "Strout Ridge is prepared to make you a generous offer. $300,000. Cash. Today." I stopped pulling canes. I straightened up. I wiped my hands on my jeans. I did not say anything for a long minute. I looked at him standing there in his expensive shoes in my yard. $300,000. My father had left me $87,000 to keep this place. This man was offering to take it from me for almost 4 times that much. I let myself think about it for one honest moment. About the things $300,000 could do for a girl who had grown up with 200. College. An apartment. A car. A future neat and clean in a city with a name and an address and a deposit on a place that did not have a broken window. It was a lot of money. It was, I think now, the test. "No," I said. He blinked. The polite smile flickered. "Miss Holloway." "No," I said again. "You should not give me an answer that fast," he said. "You should think about it." I did. I said. "Think about it longer." "No," I said. The polite smile was gone now. His face had set. It was a different face under there. "Miss Holloway," he said, "you should understand something. Strout Ridge is going to develop this entire valley. We have the permits in process. We have the investors. Your 50 acres is an inconvenience. We will acquire it eventually one way or another. We can do it the easy way today with a number that changes your life. Or we can do it the hard way over months and years, with zoning challenges, road access disputes, nuisance, suits, environmental reviews, and a legal team that costs more in a week than your house is worth. I have done it both ways. I would rather do it the easy way. For both of us. He was good at it. He had said it many times. I could feel that standing there in my yard. I could feel the shape of the rooms he had said it in. The kitchens, the barns, the living rooms. I could feel the shape of all the families who had said yes to that speech. Because they were tired and broke and old and alone. I was tired and broke and young and not alone. "Mr. Strout," I said. "Yes." "You see that house behind me?" "I see it. My father built it with his hands, every nail, every board, every shingle. I'm sure he did. He died so that I could come home to it." His face went still. "He paid for it twice, Mr. Strout. Once with his work, once with his life. You and your company are not getting it for any price you can put on a check." He looked at me for a long moment. "You are making a mistake, Miss Holloway." "Maybe," I said, "but it will be mine. You will hear from our attorneys." "That's fine. Have a good evening." "Get off my land." He turned on his heel. He walked back to his truck. He got in. He pulled the door shut harder than he needed to. He turned the truck around in my yard, and he drove out down my lane, and the gravel under his tires sounded different on the way out than it had on the way in. I stood in the yard with the blackberry canes piled at my feet and my torn-up hands hanging at my sides. My heart was beating very hard. My breath was short. But under the shaking, I felt something I had not felt in 18 years. I felt clear. I went back inside. I climbed the stairs to my father's room. I sat on the edge of his iron bed for a long time, and then I went down to the barn, and I went to the back wall, and I started pulling the boards, because the night before in the small yellow room I had been thinking. I'd been thinking about something in his second letter, about a sentence he had not quite finished, about the way he had said the books in the footlocker were the manual for the life I would build. He had said one last piece. Floorboards. Money. That was one last piece. But my father had been a man who built in layers, a man who had hidden a deed in a Bible and a key in a chimney, and a lock combination in a row of pinpricks, and a fortune under a rocking horse did not stop hiding things at the second hiding place. I had been searching the house. I had not yet really searched the barn. The pegboard came off the back wall in long sections. He had built it on a frame hinged at the top with a simple latch at the bottom. I lifted the latch. The whole pegboard swung out from the wall like a door, the tools still hanging from their pegs, and behind it was a narrow space between the studs. In that space, packed neatly like books on a shelf, were a row of accordion folders, 8 of them, each one labeled in his hand. Strout Ridge, Strout Ridge, Strout Ridge. I pulled the first one off the shelf. I opened it on the workbench. My hands were shaking again. The folder was full of paper. Photocopies, land records, newspaper clippings, court filings from other counties, names of families, names of farms, maps of the valley with parcels colored in, a long handwritten list going back 15 years of every property Strout Ridge Holdings had acquired through a back tax auction in the 4-county region. Beside each one in his own hand, my father had noted the assessed value, the auction price, and the difference. The pattern was unmistakable. Properties valued at $200,000 and $300,000 and $500,000 had been sold at auction for $12,000, $15,000, $20,000. Year after year. To the same buyer, with the same county assessor signing off, with the same auction officer running the sale. My father had not just been a man hiding from his past in the woods. My father had been building a case. He had known they were coming. Not the men he had owed this time. Their grandsons, their nephews, the men who used briefcases instead of fists. He had known they would come for me after he was gone, and he had spent the last years of his life quietly, patiently gathering the rope they would hang themselves with. I sat down on the floor of the barn beside the pegboard. I held that first folder against my chest. He had not just left me a house, and a barn, and a horse, and a key. He had left me an arsenal. I drove down to Wren's the next morning. She made me coffee. I spread the folders out across her kitchen table. She went through them slowly. Her hands shook. "Your father," she said quietly, "was a smarter man than any of us knew." We took the folders to Judge Vale that afternoon. He went through them in his chambers for a long time. He did not say much. When he had finished the second folder, he picked up his phone. He spoke for a few minutes to a woman named Caroline, who he told me later was an old friend at the United States Attorney's Office in Portland. He read her 3 of the names from my father's list. He read her 2 of the auction prices. He read her the name of the county assessor. He listened. Then he said, "I thought so. I will FedEx you copies tonight." He hung up. He looked across the desk at me. "Miss Holloway," he said, "I do not want you to repeat any of this outside of this room. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir. There has been a federal interest in this company for 2 years. They have not had what they needed. They have it now. I am going to send these folders to people who are going to know what to do with them." I nodded. "It is going to take time," he said. "Federal cases always take time. Months, a year, maybe more. While that is happening, this man, Lincoln Strout, and the men who employ him are going to come at you with everything they have left. They are going to throw lawsuits at you. They are going to try to delay you. They are going to try to scare you. I understand. Do you have somewhere to go if you need to leave that house?" "No," I said, "and I am not leaving." He looked at me for a long moment. He smiled. It was a small smile under that big bulldog face. "That is what I figured your answer would be," he said. "Your father had that same set to his jaw." The federal investigators came up the next week. 2 of them. A woman in her 40s with short gray hair, and a man in his 50s who walked like his back hurt. They sat at my kitchen table. I had cleaned the table. I had wiped the dust off the chairs. I had a kettle on. I had nothing to put in cups but old instant coffee from the pantry, and I apologized for it, and they said it was the best old instant coffee they had ever had. They went through the folders for 6 hours. Before they left, the woman asked me a question. She asked it carefully. "Miss Holloway," she said, "is there any reason your father might have had a personal interest in this company, beyond his neighbors?" I did not answer right away. I thought about the letter, about the men he had owed, about the long reach of the past, about the fact that the man in the suit who had stood in my yard offering me $300,000 had a name that began the same way the company's name began. "I think there might be," I said. I told her in general terms what was in my father's first letter. I did not show her the letter. The letter was mine. But I told her enough. She wrote it down. She and the man with the bad back exchanged a long look across my kitchen table. "That would explain," he said quietly, "a few things." I learned the rest of it slowly in pieces over the months that followed. Strout Ridge Holdings was the cover of a larger company. The larger company was owned by a holding trust. The trust was controlled by a family. The family had old money, and the old money had not all been clean money. One branch of that family 3 generations back had run the kind of operation that my father as a young man had owed the wrong people a debt to. It had not been the same men. They were gone. But it had been the same blood, and the blood had remembered. When my father had bought this land under his real name, 20-some years ago, he had drawn a thread back to that family. He had not known at the time that the family was already in the business of buying up land in this part of Oregon. By the time he understood it, it was too late for him to undo the deed. So he did the only thing he could think of. He started a file. He kept it in a barn. He closed his eyes and bet that one day his daughter would find it. He had been right about most of it. He had been wrong about one thing. He had thought he would pay the debt off when he died. The debt had been bigger than he knew. A debt like that does not die when one man dies. It looks for the next name. He had given them his life. They had taken it. And then they had come back for the rest. They did not get the rest. The federal case took 11 months to put together. It was filed in the spring after my 19th birthday. By the end of that year, Lincoln Strout was a defendant in 2 indictments. The county assessor had taken a plea, and the holding trust above Strout Ridge had agreed to a settlement that returned 23 properties to the original families or their heirs, with all back taxes forgiven. I did not see Lincoln Strout again. I read his name in the paper. That was enough. The work on my house took longer than the federal case did. The work on my house is in a way still going on. A house like that is not a project. It is a partner. Cal Boatwright came up the lane the morning after Wren's first visit. He was a small old man with bowed legs and big hands and a face like a walnut. He stood in my barn for 15 minutes with his hands on his hips, looking at the pegboard. "Your daddy," he said finally, "kept a clean shop. He showed me how to drain the carburetor on the generator. He showed me how to mix the gas. He showed me how to pull the cord. The first time that engine coughed and caught and held. The first time a light bulb in my kitchen came on, I stood in front of the bare bulb for a long minute and I did not move. The light fell on the table where my father had sat. It fell on the chair where I had been sitting. It was a small light. It was the most light I had ever stood inside. The neighbors began to come up the lane after that, one at a time at first, then in twos and threes. They brought casseroles. They brought jars of preserves. They brought quilts. They brought stories. I learned from those stories who my father had been when he was alive in this place. I learned that he had a terrible singing voice and that he sang to the chickadees on his porch anyway. I learned that he had pulled a neighbor's old retriever out of a flooded culvert in the spring of 2007 and had carried the dog 2 miles in the rain to a vet and had paid the bill in cash and refused to give his name. I learned that he had built a ramp for an old man named Henry, whose legs had gone bad and had refused to be paid for it, and had stood in the kitchen drinking coffee with Henry's wife for 2 hours afterward talking about nothing. I learned that he tipped too much in the one diner in town and that the owner, who had since died, had kept a coffee cup with his name on it on a high shelf for him for years, even after he was gone. He was not the man I had been told about for 10 years. He had not been a drifter. He had been a neighbor. He had not been a man with no people. He had been a man with people he had chosen in a small place he had chosen where he had been quietly, carefully, patiently good. I had inherited him from them in pieces. It was the second inheritance. It was in some ways the bigger one. A year went by. The porch came down and went back up. The roof got patched and then replaced. The barn got new siding on the south wall. The orchard got pruned. The garden got cleared. I planted a row of tomatoes that first summer, and they came up crooked and small, and I ate them anyway, standing in the dirt with the salt of my own sweat still on my hands. I enrolled in the community college 60 miles down the mountain. Online classes mostly. Agriculture, small business. I studied at my father's desk in his chair with his pen in my hand. I worked through every book in the green footlocker. I folded the pages he had folded. I read the notes he had written in the margins. He had written notes the way a teacher writes notes for a student he loves. Try this in clay soil. Skip this chapter, the author is wrong. Use a sharper bit. Cedar is forgiving. It was the longest conversation I had ever had with my father. It is still going on. One night in the autumn of my second year on the land, I went up to the small yellow room. The rocking horse was where it had always been. I had not moved it. I had not played with it. I had not let anyone else touch it. It was not toy. It was a covenant. I sat down beside it on the floor. I had finally been ready that night to listen. I had brought the cassette recorder up from the cedar box. I had bought a fresh pair of batteries at the hardware store in town. I had put them in. I had set the recorder on the floor between me and the horse. I had pressed play. The hiss of an old tape. A long second of silence. And then, after 20 years, my father's voice came back into the world. It was deep. It was gentle. It was tired the way a man's voice gets tired at the end of a day of building. He said hello to me. He said my name. He told me on that tape about the well and the right way to keep the pump from freezing. He told me about the 2 apple trees at the back of the orchard and which one bore the sweeter fruit. He told me about the patch of wild strawberries that came up along the creek every June. He told me about the eagles that nested every spring in the tall fir at the edge of the property, and how I would hear them before I ever saw them. He told me the land was stubborn. He told me it was honest. He told me it would test me. He told me it would break my back. He told me it would freeze my fingers in the winter and scorch my neck in the summer. He told me it would cost me. And he told me in the same breath that if I listened to it, if I was good to it, it would be good back. It would feed me. It would hold me. It would, in time, become a home. The tape was about 10 minutes long. The end of it was the part I remember best. He said he was proud of me. He said he had always been proud of me. And then, just before the click and the long hiss of empty tape, he said 3 more words. He said them quietly. He said them the way a man says the most important sentence of his life when he is alone in a room and not sure anyone will ever hear it. He said, "Welcome home, kiddo." I sat in that yellow room for a long time after the tape ended. The rocking horse beside me, the window dark, a small light burning in the hall. I was not crying. I was past that. I was sitting in the place where the work had been done, and the noise had stopped, and a voice had come back across 20 years to tell me what I already knew. I was home. I have lived on this land now for almost 6 years. The house has a new roof. The barn has new siding. The fences are up. The orchard bears every fall. There are 7 hens in the hen house and 2 goats in the back paddock, and a long list of things I still do not know how to do, and a longer list of things I'm learning. I am 24 years old. I have a degree from the community college. I keep my own books. I pay my own taxes on time every year. I have not sold a single acre. The cedar box still sits on my father's desk. I keep his pen on the blotter where he left it. I keep the Bible open to Proverbs. I keep his letter in the top drawer. There was one more thing. I had not opened it for a long time. In the cedar box behind the first letter behind the cassette, there had been a 3rd envelope. I had seen it the first night. I had not been ready for it then, and I had not been ready for it for a long time after. It was a thinner envelope. The paper was the same cream. The handwriting on the front was my father's. The line across it was 4 words. "When you are ready." About your mother. I have not opened that one yet. I will one day. I know I will. I will sit down at his desk in the small office with the corkboard above me and the pen in my hand, and I will slit the seal with my thumb, and I will read it, and I will know whatever there is to know. But not yet. I am not in a hurry anymore. This is my story. I have told it the way it happened to me. I have not made it neater than it was. I have not made it kinder than it was. The man I came from was not a simple man. The men who came after him were not kind men. The land I inherited was not an easy gift. None of it was easy. But I want you to hear something before you go. If you have been told a story about yourself that does not feel like the whole truth, I want you to know that there might be a deed folded inside a Bible somewhere in your life. There might be a key under a stone. There might be a letter waiting in a cedar box in a room you have not walked into yet, written by somebody who loved you better than you ever knew. You might have to walk 12 miles in the rain to find it. You might have to push on a stone that does not want to move. You might have to sit in the dark for a long time before the morning comes. Do it anyway. The thread is in your hand. Pull it. Welcome home.